Blame it all on my words. I should.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Hollywood Remembers video. Today, we're going to pay a heartfelt tribute to the American stars we've recently lost, as well as other beloved figures around the world who have touched our lives. Before we begin, if this content resonates with you, please leave a like. It helps the channel continue bringing you tributes made with respect and care. Thank you for being here. Now, let's begin.
Rafael Pineda, known to countless viewers as the steady, familiar face of Univision 1 in New York, has died. He was 88. For so many families, his voice and presence were part of the rhythm of daily life, the kind of anchor you didn't just watch, you trusted. Pineda was a retired Cuban-American television news reporter who spent 4 decades behind the desk at WXTV, the Univision affiliate in New York. That's a lifetime of nights spent telling people what they needed to know in the language they spoke at home. Details about his passing haven't been shared here, and it's hard to sum up a life like his with a single moment anyway. What stands out is the consistency, showing up night after night for a community that often had to fight to be seen and heard. In a city as loud and fast as New York, Spanish-speaking viewers could turn on the TV and find something steady, someone who made the news feel closer, clearer, and human. 4 decades is more than a career, it's a bond. And for those who grew up with WXTV on in the background, Rafael Pineda will be remembered not just as a broadcaster, but as a presence, calm, dignified, and deeply familiar.
Dennis Milton, the former middleweight title challenger and proud amateur standout from New York, has passed away this morning. He was 64. For boxing fans who remember his name, Dennis wasn't just a guy who fought. He was a man who earned his spot, round by round, with grit and discipline. The news of his passing is still fresh, and details haven't been shared here. But even without all the specifics, you can feel what a loss this is to the people who knew him, trained with him, and watched him come up. New York boxing has always been a tough world. You don't get praised for almost, you get respected for surviving it, for putting in the work when nobody's looking. Dennis first made his mark in the amateurs, where he stood out for talent and toughness. That foundation carried him into the pros, where he climbed high enough to challenge for a middleweight title, a level only a small handful ever reach. That moment alone says something. It says he belonged. And after the lights go out and the noise fades, what's left is the memory of a fighter who represented his city with pride. Today, people will remember Dennis Milton for the battles he took on, the standard he set, and the name he made in the sport he loved.
Peter Napolitano, better known to so many viewers as Produce Pete, has died. He was 80. For more than 30 years on air with NBC New York, he became one of those rare local TV personalities who felt like part of the family. The guy you trusted when you were standing in the grocery aisle, trying to figure out what was fresh and what wasn't. Over decades, Produce Pete did something simple and somehow special. He made everyday life easier. He talked about fruits and vegetables, sure, but really he was talking about taking care of your home, your budget, your health, and your people. Week after week, he brought a friendly kind of expertise to viewers across the city and suburbs, always with that familiar energy and warmth. Details about the circumstances of his passing haven't been shared here, but what's clear is the size of the space he leaves behind. In a place like New York, where everything moves fast and people come and go, staying on the air for more than 3 decades means you did more than show up. It means you connected. And that's what many will remember most, not just the tips, not just the segments, but the feeling he gave people. A steady voice, a helpful friend. Rest in peace, Peter Napolitano. Produce Pete will not be forgotten.
Garth Brooks is often described in extremes. The loudest crowd, the biggest chorus, the most tickets sold. But numbers have a way of hiding the most important part of a story. Because before the stadiums, before the anthems sung back to him by tens of thousands of voices, there was something quieter shaping him. A tension between steadiness and sensitivity, discipline and emotion. Garth Brooks did not grow up chasing fame. He grew up learning how to stand his ground. Born in Tulsa, Oklahoma, he was raised in a household where music existed alongside structure. His father, Troil Raymond Brooks, was firm, practical, shaped by responsibility. His mother, Colleen Carroll, was musical, expressive, and emotionally present. One valued consistency, the other encouraged feeling. That contrast mattered. It created a young boy who learned early how to balance control with expression, how to be grounded without becoming rigid, and open without falling apart. Long before success entered the picture, he was already practicing something more complex than ambition: emotional navigation. Music, at first, wasn't a dream. It was a place to breathe. As a teenager, Brooks explored sports, discipline, and routine. He wrestled competitively and learned about endurance, failure, and repetition, lessons that would later echo on a much bigger stage. Music came alongside those lessons, not as rebellion, but as release. Where pressure built, music softened the edges. His early performances weren't polished statements of destiny. They were experiments, attempts. Small rooms, imperfect sound, uncertain reactions. But something important was forming underneath the surface, a connection instinct, an understanding that performance wasn't about showing off, it was about meeting people where they were emotionally. That instinct would become his quiet advantage. When Brooks left Oklahoma for Nashville, he didn't arrive as a finished product or a bold disruptor. He arrived as a student, someone observing the industry rather than attacking it, someone listening as much as singing. The early years were humbling. Doors didn't swing open. Momentum came slowly. But those years built something sturdier than hype: patience. By the time opportunity finally appeared, it didn't land on someone fragile or naive. It landed on someone already trained by resistance, shaped by contrast, grounded by discipline, and guided by emotion. This wasn't the beginning of a superstar. It was the formation of someone who could eventually carry one.
Success rarely arrives the way people imagine. It doesn't knock loudly. It tests quietly. Before the world recognized his voice, Garth Brooks had to learn something more uncomfortable than failure: invisibility. Nashville was full of talented singers with strong songs and bigger confidence. Being good wasn't enough. Being different wasn't either. The industry didn't reward ambition, it rewarded timing. And timing could not be rushed. Early showcases came and went. Some rooms were polite, others were indifferent. The message wasn't rejection, it was ambiguity. He wasn't told no, he was told nothing. For many artists, that silence is where belief begins to crack. For Brooks, it became a classroom. He started observing what moved people rather than what impressed them. How audiences reacted when stories felt personal. How restraint could sometimes land harder than power. He studied crowd behavior the way others studied charts. What he discovered was simple but rare. People don't remember perfection. They remember how something made them feel. So he adjusted, not by diluting who he was, but by clarifying it. His sound began to stretch beyond strict tradition. Subtle elements of rock energy and pop accessibility entered the picture, not as rebellion against country music, but as expansion. The goal wasn't to replace the genre, it was to invite more people into it. That decision would later define everything. When his debut album finally arrived, the response wasn't explosive, it was steady. Songs found listeners gradually. Word traveled organically. Each performance strengthened the bond between artist and audience.
Momentum didn't spike, it accumulated. And then something shifted. Live shows began to feel different. Brooks didn't perform at the audience, he pulled them into the experience. He ran, jumped, sweated, and stayed emotionally exposed in a way that felt almost risky. Vulnerability became part of the spectacle. It wasn't polished bravado, it was commitment. As radio embraced his sound and audiences grew, the foundation beneath the success mattered more than the success itself. He wasn't chasing applause anymore. He was carrying a responsibility to show up fully every night without emotional armor. That intensity would later become legendary. But it also came with a cost that was not yet visible. Because learning how to be heard is only the first lesson. Learning how to survive being heard by millions, that lesson was still waiting.
There is a moment in many careers when growth becomes acceleration, and acceleration demands structure. For Garth Brooks, that moment came faster than expected. The audience expanded, the tours grew larger, records sold at a scale that redefined what country music could be. Expectations multiplied, not only from fans and labels, but from the version of himself he felt required to uphold. Outwardly, everything looked aligned. Inwardly, the pace began to create friction. Success had arrived with force, but infrastructure, emotional, personal, logistical, lagged behind. Touring was relentless, decisions had to be made quickly, financial responsibility increased alongside public exposure, and the quiet spaces that once allowed reflection became scarce. This wasn't collapse, it was compression. Family life existed in parallel to a rapidly intensifying public identity. The balance between provider, partner, performer, and individual became harder to maintain without compromise. Brooks has spoken over time about how demanding schedules tested boundaries that had once felt stable. The challenge wasn't a lack of gratitude, it was sustainability. In moments like these, artists often face a choice: narrow themselves to survive the machine, or step back and reassess the cost of momentum. For Brooks, that internal reckoning didn't arrive with drama or public spectacle. It emerged gradually, through awareness. The realization was simple, but heavy. Success can solve problems, but it can also delay confronting them. Rather than escalating the pace indefinitely, he began to recalibrate. Decisions were made that favored long-term presence over immediate expansion. The industry, accustomed to constant output, didn't always understand this approach. But understanding wasn't the goal. Preservation was. This phase marked a subtle shift in how Brooks viewed achievement. Records and attendance mattered, but they no longer defined completion. The question became less about how far and more about at what cost. Importantly, this wasn't retreat, it was redirection. The ability to pause without disappearing, to step back without losing relevance, required something deeper than confidence. It required identity beyond performance, an internal anchor that did not depend on applause. That anchor, built over years of discipline and emotional awareness, held. By choosing reflection over reaction, Brooks protected something essential, not just a career, but the person behind it. And in doing so, he prepared for a future phase that wouldn't be measured only by volume or velocity, but by meaning. At a certain stage, success stops asking how much more you can achieve and starts asking what you are willing to carry forward. For Garth Brooks, legacy was never meant to be frozen in trophies or sales figures. Those markers exist, undeniably, but they were never the destination, only evidence of movement. What mattered more was continuity, remaining present without becoming trapped by an earlier version of himself. As the years advanced, the shape of his life evolved. The role of husband deepened,
Fatherhood shifted from responsibility to perspective. Music remained central, but it no longer demanded every ounce of identity. It became one expression among many, not the sole definition. This distinction changed everything. Instead of chasing reinvention for its own sake, Brooks leaned into integration. The performer, the private man, the listener, all began to exist in closer alignment. He no longer needed to outrun expectations because he had learned how to choose them. That choice is quiet and rare. In an industry that rewards constant visibility, he embraced something more durable, selective presence. When he appeared, it was intentional. When he stepped away, it was complete. There was no need to explain the rhythm, only to respect it. The result was stability rather than spectacle. What audiences encountered in later years wasn't a man trying to relive momentum, but someone comfortable carrying it differently. The energy was still there, the connection remained intact, but beneath it lived calm, earned through reflection rather than reinforced through noise. This is where the story subtly shifts, because the most impressive transformation in Brooks's journey is not musical or commercial, it is internal, a move away from proving and toward understanding, away from expansion and toward coherence. His legacy, then, is not confined to how many people listened. It lives in how many recognized something familiar in his presence, the negotiation between ambition and peace, between visibility and wholeness. In the end, the measure isn't how loudly a career echoes, it's how well a person learns to inhabit their own life once the echoes fade. And perhaps that is the quiet truth behind the volume. The most enduring role isn't performing for the world, it's learning how to stay whole within it.